Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of B-Sides. My name is Pastor Jon, and I am here with my fellow pot stirrer.
Pot stirrer.
Pot, not that kind of pot. The other stuff, the partner in crime, Pastor Rusten.
What's up?
How are you doing?
Good. Stirring that pot.
Stirring that pot. Yeah. You know what's really funny? I saw this. It's totally off topic. There was this commercial about like people kind of just, having bad days and trying to like get themselves, in a better mood. And I can't remember if it was a product that they were talking about or it was like mental health, but one of the spokespersons was Snoop Dogg. And I thought, Snoop Dogg, we all know what you do when you have a bad day.
I feel like anybody who wants Snoop Dogg to be their representative of their product.
For like mental health?
For mental health? Yeah, well, that's weird.
Do you remember Gin and Juice?
Like, you can kind of understand it maybe for like, Twinkies or, Frito-Lay, but or Taco Bell.
Edibles, gummies.
So
anyways, so here we are. And if you've watched these before, the tables have turned because you usually do the intro.
Yep.
And I usually say peace, but today I did the intro.
There's a reason why I usually do the intro.
Yeah, it's because I'm usually preaching and you're leading. But we're talking about Acts 9, the middle part of Acts 9, and you actually preached the sermon on it. Mm-hmm. And I think I told you, I listened to that sermon, like I laughed out loud.
Oh, yeah.
It was so good.
I talked about punchlines and jokes. And,
oh my gosh.
And cliffhangers. So.
Yes, the kind of stories that God likes to tell. That was like the 10-minute intro, right?
Yeah, if
I remember that.
If I preach a sermon, there's a 10-minute intro, and then I rush through 3 points.
That's so true.
I mean, every time I do it, every time I look at I'm like, well, by the time I'm getting to the 3 points, I'm like, and people know that the points are coming later.
Here we go. Yeah. You're 20 minutes in. Okay, so what happened previously in Acts is Saul has this encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus. He's going to persecute the church. He meets Jesus. He's saved. He's connected with Ananias, who's going to help him and who's understandably resistant. And now
he's going to Damascus.
Saul's going to Damascus. He's keeping the itinerary, right?
It's like he's got his train ticket, and he's like, "Oh, well, I still got the ticket.
Yeah,
I better go there."
So he goes.
Yep.
So take it from there. What do you make of the story?
So one of the things I emphasized when I preached on this is that there is a kind of humor to it. God has ambushed Saul with his sovereign grace, like we talked about in the last episode. And all of Saul's energy, described as breathing murder and threats, is now like judoed, right? Into proclaiming Christ. And he was once the public enemy of the church, number one, and he becomes public defender, number one of the church. Yeah. And the humorous part about it is that he goes, it's like this theme comes up a lot in Acts. You go back to the same spot you got kicked, you were gonna go to, or when the people get kicked out of the temple, they keep on going back to Solomon's portico. Like that's just where we go until they kill Stephen.
Yeah.
But Saul goes to Damascus because that's where he was going to go. And so the surprising thing is that he was going to go to the synagogues with a purpose. The purpose was to bind Christians and take them to Jerusalem to try them.
Men and women.
Yeah, to try them. He had papers. He showed up with his assignment. And he would have come in with his papers and basically, tried to sniff out the Christians. And when he arrives, this is the funny part, I think, is that when he arrives, everybody there knows why he's coming because he's got papers, and we see in the text that they're like, "Isn't this the guy who sniffs out Christians?"
Yeah.
And instead, the first thing out of his mouth is, "Christ is the Son of God."
Yeah.
And then you get this chatter, like you get the person, like it's recorded for us, which means that Luke probably talked to some of these people, like, yeah, we were like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Like, isn't this the guy who has letters to arrest the Christians and bind them away? Like, and if you're a Christian in that audience, you gotta be like, smells like a trap.
Yeah.
Smells like a trap. I mean, how is he gonna sniff him out? Well, he's gonna make it pretty clear, like, who's gonna say amen?
Yeah.
Amen. Oh, crud. I've been.
Come on.
Yep. So
good word.
So yeah, he ends up
Preach.
He ends up then in Damascus disputing with the Jews and confounding them, proving to them that Jesus is the Christ.
Yeah.
And I think that the biggest proof probably that Jesus was the Christ to them would have been Saul himself being like, no, I met him.
Yeah.
And you were the guy. I've put people in jail to be killed, and now I'm here to preach him. Like that would have confounded them, surely.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really appreciated you actually spent quite a bit of time, I think, going into it, is that when Saul becomes a Christian, right? He didn't treat his Christian faith as if it was this private thing that he kind of just added to his life, and he kind of just, went about his business and didn't really do anything with it. That's not what happened in his life. And you did a really good job of pointing out, well, what did happen and why is that matter? So can you tease that out a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to emphasize, because I think it's like a perennial temptation for us. I wanted to emphasize that for Paul, becoming a Christian, coming to know Jesus, didn't mean all of a sudden all this activity I was doing, this activity of promoting Judaism, promoting and shutting down the opponents of Judaism like Christians, all of that kind of activity was somehow unholy or not right for him to engage in. He doesn't turn into a private person at that point. He doesn't turn into someone who would build a monastery off in the middle of nowhere. He turns into a proclaimer of Jesus. And instead of binding people, he is proclaiming Christ to them. And he's confounding them instead of binding them. He's confounding them and frustrating them by his preaching, and by his preaching with boldness. And so I just, to me, I think that was important to emphasize, because I think we have a temptation, like I said, to think that being a Christian means having a posture in the world that is very non-offensive, avoid conflict at all costs. Saul doesn't demonstrate that at all. And honestly, he probably was a huge relief to the church because he was that way. The church was under heavy persecution, and he drew a lot of that to himself because he was vocal, because he was disputing with the Hellenists, because he was confounding the Jews in Damascus. I didn't get into this in the sermon where it talks about the peace that the church has afterwards. But I can't help but think that part of that peace is because Saul took a lot of the fire. Right? It's very Christ-like. He threw his, but we don't think about, like, when was the last time you thought about a pastor who emphasizes something and then gets all the heat from the culture as somebody who's acting Christ-like? It's like, well, he's drawing it to himself, right? As an example, and because of that, in that situation, the church gets relief potentially from those who would persecute the
There's
church.
a protection from that.
And he gets it instead.
So you just reminded me of a scene in the movie A Quiet Place. Have you seen that?
I have. I think I've seen both of them.
Yeah, both of those are super good.
Yeah.
I went and saw the second one with my daughter in the movie theater.
I can't think of what scene you're thinking of.
Okay, so there's a scene in the first movie. Actually, I saw the first movie, and it surprised me that movie got produced and got traction because of
the emphasis on dads.
The emphasis on dads, and not just the emphasis on dads. Like the part 2 is all about the dad as well. It's really interesting, even though he's passed. But in the first, spoiler alert, go watch the movie. there's these monsters that they
I know what you're
can't
talking
see, but they hear, right? And so that's why you have to be quiet. And there's a moment where his kids are in trouble, and he stands up. I think it's in the truck, and he just makes all of this noise, and he draws the monster to himself.
Yells and screams.
And he lays down his life, and he is killed. And and what do his kids have? They have peace. You know, that's kind of what you're talking about is going on here. Like Saul becomes the lightning rod, and everything, all of the anger, all of the animosity, all of the tolerance is poured out on him. Yeah.
He gets to be that kind of like, and in a lot of ways, he's you know, you could see how a pastor like that might be really helpful in especially preparing a church for, preparing a church for living during those heavier conflict times.
Yeah.
He takes the heat rather than the church as a whole or whatever. But
yeah, and there's a revealing that goes on as well.
Yeah.
Like as the pastor is taking the heat, as Saul's taking the heat, the true nature and color of the enemies are being exposed, right? Everybody can see it. Like, oh yeah, this is jacked.
Yeah.
So he doesn't become a pietist, living his own, quiet life. I think what's interesting is like Paul, I imagine him as being this kind of bombastic figure. Obviously he was like driven and ambitious
but he also made tents, so he's like, he's not just a man of the mind.
Yeah, and apparently tent making was a lucrative business. It wasn't this meager...
No. It's basically, you have to remember back then that a lot of people probably lived in tents.
Yeah.
And they were nice tents. And so it was kind of like, fancy tent maker.
It was lucrative.
It was like trying to think of a good comparison here. Not quite carpenter, but something like that. But but a more, something like that.
He was making North Face.
Yes, exactly.
So he, all of that passion, all that direction, it doesn't go away. It gets redirected and purposed for the kingdom, right?
Yep.
So there's something really interesting that happens with all of the conflict, and that's that he actually is in danger of being killed.
Yes, yeah. There is a conspiracy to kill Saul. The Jews in Damascus want him gone. And we actually read later in one of his letters, I can't remember the reference exactly, but I believe it's in one of the Corinthians letters, that they conscribe, the Jews basically get King Aretas to sponsor his execution and
is
capture.
That in Galatians?
Maybe I can't recall.
Yeah.
But there's a scene where if you do a Bible search on the word basket, you'll get it because this passage talks about him being let down the on the wall in a basket, and so is the passage passage from I think it's in Corinthians, one of the Corinthians passages.
Is it in Corinthians? It's not Galatians.
I thought it was in one of the Corinthians. I'm not remembering stuff really well today. So
it's because it's Wednesday afternoon.
I know,
and we had some great Mexican food,
and
we just want to take a siesta.
I know. I when we got back to the building after Mexican, I was like, "Whoa, maybe the Mexican wasn't the best idea before recording." But here we are. But he, did you find it? Is it Galatians?
No, I'm trying to find it. I thought it was Galatians, but I could be totally wrong.
Yeah.
So, anyways, when Saul is retelling this story, one of the details that comes out is that the opposition to him and his preaching was not exclusively religious.
Yeah. Yep.
It wasn't just the Jews who were conspiring against him. There was a collaboration between the Jews and
the king.
Yeah,
King Aretas. Yeah. And so, Damascus is in Syria. And so it's kind of like a mirror image of what you might see with, working with Herod to capture Jesus or something like that, or working with the Sanhedrin to imprison the apostles in Jerusalem. Because you're in Syria, the king was King Aretas, and they went to the authorities that they could go to in order to get this guy. Yeah. What's interesting is that, so I think that one of the elements that comes into play there is that in the first century, there's basically like a negotiated peace between the Jews, the Jewish religion, and the empire. So the Jewish religion, like the empire basically was like everything had to, like all worship was under their control. Like they had everything under their thumb in terms of control.
Like telling them when to sing, not to sing, if they could sing.
Yeah, you know, like who could come, what kind of papers they need in order to come. I mean, there are letters of there are letters in Rome. So the emperor was so like the emperor of Rome at different points, but I can't remember which one it was. But there's records of the emperors being so paranoid about any kind of gatherings, public gatherings, that there are people in Rome who ask the emperor to sanction a fire brigade because there had been multiple fires. It's like, we just have 6 guys. We want to meet and make plans and pull our resources together so that we can have a fire station of sorts to work to put out fires if something happens. And the emperor shuts it down because he's paranoid about gatherings and what they might mean for his rule. So it's not a new tyrannical government thing, the idea of controlling gatherings. It's a long, like, because there's a lot of power in the gathered body of people, and the emperors know this.
And today, is there a particular group of people that is known for gathering on a regular basis more than any other segment of culture?
I don't know anybody who gathers as often as the church. So there's, that's what the word means, gathering. So, but you have a special negotiated place for Jews. Jews gathered in the synagogue. Synagogue was a private gathering of Jews, and that was okay under the emperor. Okay, you can do that. They didn't get there easy. You have the whole Maccabean revolt and wars leading up to that point. It's like, you know what? It might just be easier on us if we let them do that.
Let these turkeys
let them do their thing. Let them worship Yahweh, even if they do it exclusively. Fine. So when the Christians start to come up in the ranks of the synagogues and in the ranks of the Jews. Their greatest weapon against the Christian ends up being the denouncement of them, to say they're not Jews. They're not like us. They're not, no, these Christians are not Jews. So what are they? Well, they're one of these, they're whatever they are, they're a threat to the emperor. You thought we were, but we got this special deal. We don't want them encroaching upon our special deal. That was their weapon against them. Rather than become that was the tool that they could use to get the emperor and the kings against them. Now, King Aretas, I'm not exactly the name and the title doesn't sound like he was a Roman official, but I'm just saying that was a common thing that happened, and that's actually one of the reasons why Revelation, you have that dynamic of the synagogue of Satan. Right.
Which we just talked about last night.
Yes.
So one of the things I'm thinking here, and you talk about this, is that there has just been endless, ongoing discussion and debate and division over how churches interact with magistrates, especially when it comes to mandates. And I think there's a lot of people who would just say, go along to get along, right? Like, we just got to do this. And one of the things that calls it into question is the early church. Right? This is like, we've already seen earlier in Acts, they've been ordered not to do it. They've been put in prison. They've been beat up. Now you have the religious leaders who do have civil authority appealing to higher magistrates to kill Saul, right? And still you have this church militant, this church that is still going to gather. And it's not just because they want to exercise their religious liberty, which is guaranteed in some document. It's like
it's not just like
Christ is Lord.
The point isn't religious freedom.
Yeah.
The point is what we get to do with religious freedom,
Right.
in which we should be let alone to do with religious freedom. And if we're told to pray for it, we also should be acting on behalf of it, right?
Yeah.
Like we're told to pray that we would live peace with people and be able to worship God in a dignified way without the government stepping all over us.
Right.
So you should also act to protect that too.
Yes.
Right. Otherwise, are you really praying in faith?
Right. So the conflict doesn't go away. It keeps going. But then, so you talked about also at the end of the text, you get this snapshot of, you have these interactions with Saul and then this kind of description of the church.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Luke records multiple times is he talks about the proclamation of the gospel and bold preaching.
Yep.
You talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think this is what you're referring to, but like one of the things I emphasize is that Saul was a preacher. He was a word guy. Mm-hmm. He was disputing. He was preaching boldly. He was disputing with the Hellenists. He was really using his words, which is interesting because he wasn't doing that before. He was using physical restraint to shut up Christians. And so this is like reminds me of what he says later in Ephesians, which is our, we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. Yeah. And the spirit. What is the weapon? The primary weapon in that fight? It's the word. Yeah. Right. So there is you can see Saul putting down his restraints, his physical restraints in this situation, and exchanging it for verbal tearing down of arguments, subjecting all things under the lordship of Christ. You see that happen in this scene.
It preached boldly. Preaching boldly in the name of the Lord. He spoke and disputed.
Yes. I think that that's whenever I read that, I think that I'm feeling a conviction that against my former disposition and inclinations, which is like bold preaching, is kind of, needlessly bombastic, or bold preaching is needlessly sensational, or needlessly, or maybe we would be better off if we didn't draw so many lines in the sand and let people there's a kind of temptation that I can remember personally having beforehand where it's like, how can you be as winsome as possible so you trick people into believing the thing that they would never believe, right? Yeah. And it's like, wait a minute.
Grease the skids a little bit.
What is it really that changes people?
Right.
It's like Paul says, I came with preaching the cross. Mm-hmm. I came preaching Christ and the cross. That is what changes people. Stop trying to be a wonderful rhetorician, right? Yeah. And think that that's going to convince people. Or think that you can somehow broaden the way of the narrow path through your communication skills. Yeah. I think that, you know what I mean? The path stays narrow because it's Christ, and there's nothing you can say to change that. Yeah. God can bless your preaching, teaching, and there's lots. I mean, I'm not saying be overly offensive, but I think that what we do is we try to broaden it when we shouldn't broaden it. Yeah, we try to skip passages because we don't want to offend people. We try to skip doctrines because
we're avoiding the very thing that is happening in Acts, and that is the gospel confronts you with the lordship of Christ, right? And there is a conflict that comes from that, and what you're saying, I totally agree. There's so much of preaching is intentionally geared to avoid every point of conflict, and the sermon is Jesus really loves you, and of course that's true, right? But
you don't even understand
the
way he loves you until you understand the conflict he had to get through
Yes.
in order to save you,
Yes.
which is our sin and our death and our blindness.
Yep.
Like we and our captivity to the devil and our captivity to the lies of the devil. Like he had to crush that
Yeah.
in order to release us.
Yeah.
And I think that I think there's a tendency with pastors to, I was talking about this earlier today, but like we tend to think that what our job is as pastors is to find the things that, to emphasize, if the world outside of the church is offended by something, to really lean into those things and get make friends with the enemies by disliking the same things they like. And anything that they find offensive, make sure we are
Don't talk
quiet
about
on
it.
that.
Yeah.
And it's like when you do that, you're not proclaiming Christ as Lord.
Right.
You're proclaiming,
You're an echo-
I want to be your friend.
You're an echo chamber for
Yes,
culture.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so what's funny is that people who hate what I just said would tell me, you're just being an echo chamber of the church.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to echo this.
Yeah.
If I echo this and this is saying consistent with what I'm saying, that's what I care about.
Yep.
And the beauty is that, guess what? When the word goes out, it doesn't return void.
Right.
Because God's behind his word.
Right.
So it's
Sovereign
not
grace.
it's not an echo chamber
Yeah.
if you're preaching the word, because the word returns. It's not void.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. So one last thing here, and we'll close it up. Okay. You talked about the word peace. What a weird word to include in a story in which you've got arguing, boldly preaching, persuading. You've got disputing. You have there's a hit on Saul, like we're gonna kill this guy. Like, this is a government conspiracy to kill a preacher.
Yeah.
Like, and then you have this peace.
Yeah. Yeah. Why? Why is there peace? Because Christ is Lord.
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me of what we talked about last night with Revelation. With everything that the church is going on, John's clear. I'm a partner in your tribulation. And he says, he's honest with, and Jesus is honest with the churches and says, you're under tribulation. But he also says, whoever conquers, right? And it's like, you look back and what did conquering look like? Well, it looked like maintaining your first love for Christ. It meant, exercising proper church discipline. It looked like standing upon the scriptures. It looks like all these things that are not what you would think, but he shows us behind the curtain and says, yeah, actually that's how I win. That's how I win. I win through my people faithfully clinging to me, clinging to their first love, and boldly proclaiming the word, boldly living out the word. There's a but that doesn't, similarly, like conquer seems like a weird word. Yeah. In Revelation to the churches, but peace seems like a weird word here. Yeah. But those things are possible because Christ is Lord. Yeah. Those things are possible because he can give us a peace that surpasses our understanding. Yeah. And he can do that because, one, he's sovereign, so we can trust him. Two, he cares for us, so he's going to provide for us. And then three, because he's proved those things by paying for us with his blood. Right. So, and it's amazing. I don't know if you've ever been in a really hard time where you're suffering or having incredible anxiety, but if you know Christ, you probably also know moments during those times where you have experienced unexpected and difficult to describe joy. Yep. And I mean, it can take tangible form, like hard time, but your Christian brothers and sisters come over and you eat a good feast together. Yeah. And you're singing songs at the table and clinking glasses, and you're like, who in the world does this? Mm-hmm. Who in the world gets this joy in the midst of all the insanity? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, because Christ is Lord, and we are his people. Yeah. We're the sheep of his pasture. Yeah. He prepares a table for us, but it's a table in the presence of our enemies. Yeah. That's one of the things I mentioned as well. But that's good. So the peace that surpasses understanding, the peace in the midst of when it hits the fan, the peace in the midst of the world freaking out, afraid. But they fear God. That's the other part of the passage. They had
Yeah.
peace, and they feared God, but that's a fear that dispels all of the fears.
Brings peace.
Yep.
Amen. All right, why don't you send us out?
All right. Everybody, thanks for listening to B-Sides, Sermon B-Sides. Until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. Bye.
See ya.